A woman was peacefully sleeping on a flight when the captain's voice cracked through the intercom, full of fear. "Is there a fighter pilot on board?" The tremor in co-pilot Anthony Green's voice echoed through the plane's system as the Boeing 747 battled one of the fiercest storms ever recorded in the skies over the North Atlantic. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a severe medical emergency. Captain Matthews is unconscious, and I need immediate assistance from anyone with combat aviation experience." In row 17B, Sarah Johnson, who had learned to sleep through nearly anything over her years of training, awoke with a start. At 32, she was no stranger to turbulence. After all, military missions didn't provide much luxury in terms of rest. But the urgency in Green's voice jolted her to attention. Sitting next to his wife, businessman Charles Harding adjusted his designer spectacles with an air of superiority. Who in their right mind would have military experience on a commercial flight? He muttered under his breath, eyeing Sarah skeptically. She was dressed simply in a black jacket and jeans, her hair tied back in a practical bun. Hardly the appearance of someone who belonged in a first-class cabin. The aircraft lurched violently as heavy rain pounded against the windows. Passengers began to panic. Children were crying. Some recited prayers, while others were frantically typing out final messages on their phones. "Please," Green's voice trembled over the intercom. "Anyone with military aviation experience, identify yourself immediately. We're flying blind through a Category 5 storm. I've never faced anything like this before alone." Sarah sat up, glancing around. She could feel the rising panic, but she knew better than most how to remain calm. She noticed how none of the passengers seemed to consider her as a possible candidate to help. To them, she was just another traveler, a woman, likely on a routine trip. Charles rose quickly, his tone dripping with arrogance. "I'm telling you," he shouted toward the cockpit. "My brother-in-law's a private pilot. I've flown with him dozens of times. I can help." A flight attendant rushed to him, shaking her head. "Sir, we need someone with specific military experience. Civilian training won't cut it in these conditions." Charles puffed out his chest, his voice oozing condescension even in the middle of a crisis. "I paid a small fortune for these first-class seats. I'm more experienced than anyone else on this plane." That's when Sarah stood up quietly, moving with a fluidity and grace that contrasted sharply with the chaos around her. Some passengers glanced at her with curiosity, while others raised their brows in disbelief. She walked calmly toward the cockpit, her voice calm but firm when she spoke to the flight attendant. "Captain Sarah Johnson, U.S. Air Force. 700 hours of flight time in F-22 Raptors, expert in survival and navigation under extreme conditions." The silence that followed was palpable. Charles Harding stared at her in stunned disbelief, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. "You can't be serious," he muttered. But Sarah's eyes held a quiet strength, a resolute calm that was only born of someone who had seen the worst and had always come out on top. Her reputation preceded her, but no one had any idea just who they were dealing with. If you're enjoying this story about perseverance and the truth of leadership, make sure to subscribe to the channel. The narrator's voice would break in, continuing. To witness how a humble passenger transforms the most terrifying flight into a demonstration of why we should never judge a book by its cover. Charles's voice filled the cabin with bitter laughter, his words dripping with disdain as the storm battered the plane. "Colonel, look, I respect our military, but I'm not about to put my life in the hands of a fantasy. I paid for these seats to avoid situations like this." His words were met with murmurs from the other passengers, some doubtful, others uncertain. An elderly woman in the front row whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She looks so young. Is she really qualified?" James Green, the co-pilot, appeared at the cabin door, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "Please, we need someone with military experience now. Captain Matthews is having seizures, and I've never been in a situation like this before." "Listen here." Charles stood again, his tone exasperated. "I've flown on private jets across Europe. I've got 200 hours of experience just as a passenger. I know all the procedures." Sarah held her silence for a moment. She had learned through her years of service that some battles had to be chosen carefully, but when she saw the terror in James's eyes, something inside her stirred. The same force that had driven her to lead countless dangerous missions. "Mr. Green," Sarah's calm voice interrupted, "I need to know our altitude. speed, and weather conditions. We're at 40,000 feet for 160 knots, with crosswinds at 130 kilometers per hour and gusts up to 170. James responded automatically, his fear subsiding a little at the confidence in her voice. Charles let out a derisive laugh. Impressive. You memorized some numbers from Wikipedia. That doesn't make you a pilot. Sarah didn't flinch. Without warning, she began to recite. Emergency procedure for decompression at cruising altitude. Oxygen masks. Emergency descent to 10,000 feet. Angle of descent not exceeding 15 degrees to avoid structural stress. Communication with air traffic control. Code 7700. For 2 minutes, she went on, listing emergency procedures that only a highly trained pilot, especially one with military experience, would know by heart. The cabin fell into an uneasy silence, the only sound the storm's fury. James stared at her, eyes wide with both relief and admiration. Ma'am, the cabin is yours, he said in awe. But Charles wasn't done. 1 minute. Anyone can memorize procedures. I want to see her credentials before I trust her with my life. His words were harsh, slicing through the air. The passengers around him looked away, embarrassed, yet unwilling to confront the man. Sarah stood tall, her expression unreadable. For a moment, her thoughts flashed to the countless times her ability had been questioned, simply because of her gender and race. The first time a commanding officer had doubted her leadership skills, or when she was denied a promotion despite having the highest combat scores in her class. She knew how to turn every doubt into fuel, every insult into an opportunity. Mr. Harding, she said, her voice low but unwavering. There are 3 types of pilots in this world. Those who fly when it's easy, those who fly when it's hard, and those who fly when it's impossible. She took a step toward the cockpit, then paused. In my career, I've saved 17 aircraft from situations where the manual said there was no chance of survival. But what qualifies me for this moment isn't the number of hours or medals. It's the fact that I've flown through a war zone, with 2 engines out, a destroyed navigation system, and enemy missiles tracking my every move. And I brought my entire squadron home. The plane jolted violently, throwing some passengers into the air. Sarah didn't even flinch, maintaining her balance effortlessly as she had in countless turbulent conditions. What qualifies me, she continued, is that I've faced the impossible and survived. As Sarah approached the cockpit, she turned one last time to address Charles. Mr. Harding, when we touch down, and we will, perhaps you will reflect on how a woman who doesn't belong in first class saved your life and that of your family. With that, Sarah entered the cockpit, leaving the passengers stunned into silence. Some began to realize the magnitude of the situation they were witnessing. Charles Harding, however, was left reeling, grappling with the realization that he had misjudged a woman who would soon prove to be one of the most capable pilots in the world. Inside the cockpit, Sarah was met with a sight that would have sent any regular commercial pilot into a panic. Captain Matthews was convulsing, his face pale, foam pouring from his mouth, while alarms blared in the background. James Green stood frozen, unsure of what to do. First aid, now, Sarah commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. She checked Matthews's vitals with the precision of someone accustomed to saving lives in the most extreme of circumstances. We've got about 15 minutes before he enters full cardiac arrest. James watched in awe as Sarah moved with practiced ease, adjusting the navigation instruments while simultaneously monitoring Matthews's condition. Colonel, how do you know so much about emergency medicine? He asked. 10 years of flying rescue missions in hostile territory, she replied, never pausing in her work. When you're the only one between a wounded soldier and death, you learn a few things. Meanwhile, in the cabin, Charles was busy spreading panic among first-class passengers, trying to convince them that they were doomed because of Sarah's supposed inexperience. Did you see how she's dressed? Qualified people don't travel like that, he muttered, casting disparaging looks at her. His wife, Emily, had been silent up until then, but she turned on him with a fiery resolve. Richard, stop it. You're being ridiculous. Ridiculous? He spun on her. I'm trying to save our lives, and you want me to trust her? Emily shook her head. No, I'm trying to save our sanity. Please stop. Sarah's voice crackled through the intercom again, but this time, there was no trace of doubt in her tone. Ladies and gentlemen, This is Colonel Johnson speaking. I will be taking command of this aircraft until we reach our destination. Please remain calm and follow all instructions from the crew." There was no mistaking the authority in her voice. It wasn't a plea for compliance. It was an order. Even Charles Harding, who had fought so hard to dismiss her, felt a chill of reluctant respect. In the cockpit, Sarah took control of the situation. She quickly assessed the conditions, adjusting the flight path. James was no longer frozen. He was actively assisting her, his confidence growing with each passing second. "James," she instructed, "monitor our fuel and pressurization systems. We're going to need accurate data every 30 seconds." "Yes, ma'am," James responded, his voice steadier now. The weight of Sarah's presence gave him the calm he needed to regain control of his own panic. For the first time since the storm hit, he felt the possibility of survival. Then, Sarah did something that completely baffled him. Instead of following standard emergency protocols and veering away from the storm, she was steering the plane directly through its heart. "Colonel, with all due respect, that goes against everything in the manual," James protested, staring at her as she made impossible calculations on a notepad. Sarah flashed a brief, confident smile. "James, let me tell you something. In 2018, I was leading a rescue mission in Afghanistan. Our aircraft was struck by surface-to-air missiles. Both engines went out, and our navigation system was destroyed. A sandstorm cut visibility to zero, and the manual said to abandon the mission. But there were 17 wounded soldiers depending on us. So, we did what I'm doing now. I threw the manual out the window and trusted what I knew." She didn't even flinch as the aircraft violently shook. "We got them home." Her voice was calm, almost serene, but every word carried the weight of an unspoken legacy. James stared at her, understanding dawning on him. You saved 17 lives. Just by your decision." "17, James," she replied, her eyes fixed firmly on the controls. "And the only way you get to be a good pilot is to know when to break the rules." Suddenly, the cockpit door swung open, and Charles Harding appeared, having somehow convinced a flight attendant to let him in. He looked around wildly, his face red with fury. "This is madness. You can't just ignore standard procedures. You're putting us all in danger." Sarah didn't even glance in his direction. "Mr. Harding, this cockpit is no place for tourists. Please return to your seat." Charles sputtered in indignation. "I've flown on private jets my entire life. I know more about aviation than you could ever dream of." The absurdity of his words made Sarah's lips curl into the faintest of smiles. "Private jets don't prepare you for the storm we're flying through, Mr. Harding. Now, please, take a seat." Charles took a step forward, about to argue again, but something made him pause. Just then, another voice broke into the tension. Dr. Laura Chong, a renowned neurosurgeon from Johns Hopkins who had remained quietly in her seat up until this moment, stood and walked toward the cockpit with purpose. "Colonel Johnson," she said calmly, "I'm Dr. Chong, a neurosurgeon. I've spent years treating pilots with neurological injuries. I can assist with Captain Matthews." Sarah turned to her, recognition passing between them like an unspoken understanding. "Doctor, it would be an honor to have you on board. The captain's condition is stable for now, but we'll need constant monitoring." Charles opened his mouth to speak, but found himself rendered speechless as Dr. Chong stepped into the cockpit, joining Sarah's well-oiled command. The sight of them together, two women, one a decorated military officer, the other an elite surgeon, was a stark reminder of how much he had misjudged. "Are you all insane?" Charles hissed, desperate for any semblance of control. Dr. Chong gave him a pointed look, her patience wearing thin. "Mr. Harding, I've treated countless military pilots. You might want to trust the woman who has the training that no amount of money can buy." Charles scoffed, but Dr. Chang's words struck harder than any storm could. "Trust her," she said simply, turning her attention back to Sarah. And that was when Sarah did something that would completely change the course of the flight and Charles Harding's life. Without missing a beat, Sarah calmly spoke into the radio. "James, tune to military emergency frequency 121.5 and confirm our position to Andrews Air Force Base." "Colonel Johnson, Andrews here, we have your coordinates. We've been tracking you for the last 20 minutes. The Air Force is mobilized and actively searching for you. We're clearing the airspace for your landing," came the voice from the other end. The plane was silent for a moment, but then, Just as the reality began to sink in, a voice on the intercom spoke. "Spectre? Is that really you?" The voice from the military tower cracked with recognition. "Yes, Spectre," Sarah responded, the call sign from her military days still fitting perfectly. Andrew's voice returned with more urgency. "Colonel Johnson, we have critical weather data. The storm's intensity is now beyond all predictions. We're sending a team to monitor your descent, but you're the only aircraft in the sky. Your position is clear. Airports on the East Coast are being closed. You're the priority." In that moment, the passengers, still in a haze of fear and uncertainty, were beginning to understand. Sarah Johnson wasn't just a passenger. She was, without a doubt, the person who would save them all. With Andrew's full support now confirmed, Sarah shifted her focus back to the controls. "James, I need you to monitor vertical speed closely. We're going to attempt something that has never been done before in a Boeing 747. James's voice shook with disbelief. "What do you mean, Colonel?" Sarah turned to him, her expression calm but unyielding. "We're going to spiral down through the heart of the storm." James looked at the readings. This was beyond even the most seasoned commercial pilot's understanding. "That's insane. It's impossible for a commercial aircraft of this size." "Impossible," Sarah repeated, her lips curving into a small but confident smile. "I'll show you why they call me Spectre." Outside, the storm was intensifying with unimaginable ferocity. Winds were reaching 180 kilometers per hour. Hail the size of baseballs bombarded the aircraft, but Sarah's hands danced across the controls, guiding the massive plane with ease through a maneuver that should have been unthinkable. "General Hayes," Sarah said over the radio, "we need to confirm that all civilian air traffic has been cleared from our path. We're going through this storm to land at Dover Air Force Base. It has the capacity for emergency landings. I need that runway ready." "Spectre, you have the runway cleared. Foam and emergency crews are in position. You have absolute priority," came the response from the military base. The airplane, battling forces of nature beyond comprehension, descended slowly and steadily, guided by Sarah's expert control, inching closer to safety. Inside the cabin, Charles Harding's face had gone ashen. He couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Every calculated movement of Sarah's transformed his understanding of competence, leadership, and the true meaning of heroism. As the plane descended further through the storm, James turned to Sarah. "How do you know this column exists?" he asked, still in awe. "Years in the field, James. I've flown through sandstorms, through conditions that the manuals didn't account for," she answered, her gaze never leaving the horizon. "When you've survived the impossible long enough, you start seeing the extraordinary in the routine." And just like that, as the aircraft descended into the calm eye of the storm, the passengers realized they were in the presence of greatness. The flight was no longer a matter of survival. It was a living testament to the power of trust, leadership, and perseverance. As the storm raged around the Boeing 747, the unthinkable happened. Sarah Johnson, Colonel Spectre, guided the massive plane through the eye of the storm with remarkable precision. The aircraft bucked and swayed, but Sarah's calm determination kept everything on course. Richard Harding, now silent, stared out the window, his mind racing as the reality of the situation finally set in. Suddenly, a new voice crackled over the radio. "Spectre, this is Commander Rodriguez. We're tracking your descent. The maneuver you're attempting is beyond belief. How are you keeping a commercial aircraft stable during this descent?" Sarah's voice came through clearly and with complete confidence. "Applied physics, Commander, and 17 years of experience turning impossible situations into safe landings." The storm was like nothing they had ever experienced. Winds whipped the plane, lightning danced through the sky, and the very air seemed alive with fury. But Sarah, with her hands on the controls, seemed to be one with the plane, guiding it with an effortless grace that defied the chaos around them. "We're watching you on radar," General Hayes, who had been tracking the plane from the Pentagon, said over the radio. "This is impossible. You're keeping a 747 on track through conditions that should have destroyed it. We've cleared the entire East Coast for you." Sarah's eyes narrowed as she focused on her calculations. She had done this before, made impossible choices, turned the tables when the odds were stacked against her. "This isn't about the plane or the storm," she said softly, almost to herself. "It's about the people on board." Meanwhile, In the cabin, the passengers were now aware of the gravity of the situation. The storms outside were nothing compared to the storm of realization that had hit them. Richard Harding, who had doubted her every step of the way, was now watching the woman he had so harshly judged turn the impossible into the miraculous. His thoughts were interrupted by a message from Sarah over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Colonel Johnson. We are currently navigating through extreme weather conditions, but rest assured, we are headed to an emergency landing. Please remain calm and follow the crew's instructions." The passengers held their breath, knowing that their fates were now in the hands of this remarkable woman who had proven herself, against all odds, to be the one person on this flight who had the expertise to save them all. The final descent was surreal. Richard couldn't believe what he was witnessing. Sarah Johnson was maneuvering the plane as though it was a fighter jet, using her military training to guide them through the storm. She had defied every expectation and silenced every critic. And now, as the runway of Dover Air Force Base came into view, the magnitude of her skill and courage was clear to everyone. As the aircraft descended through the storm, the ground crew at Dover stood ready. "Colonel Johnson, we've cleared the runway and have foam and emergency services on standby," came the voice from the control tower. "We're coming in, Commander." "Hold tight," Sarah replied, her voice steady and unwavering. The final moments were a blur of flashing lights and the roar of the storm, but Sarah executed a textbook-perfect landing, an impossible feat in such dangerous conditions. The plane touched down with precision, and as the wheels hit the runway, the entire cabin erupted into relieved cheers. Charles Harding, who had spent the entire flight doubting her, felt a sinking weight in his chest. The reality was undeniable. Sarah Johnson had just saved their lives. Not just her flight, but the lives of every single person on board. As the plane came to a full stop and the doors opened, Sarah stood tall, walking toward the exit. The passengers, many of whom had watched her journey with doubt and suspicion, now understood just who she was. They had witnessed something extraordinary. But for Sarah, this was just another day. A day where the impossible became routine, and where she proved, once again, that greatness doesn't ask for permission, it commands respect. 6 months later, Sarah Johnson was promoted to Brigadier General in a high-profile ceremony at the Pentagon, becoming the youngest black woman to ever achieve such a rank. Her storm navigation technique was now part of military training manuals around the world, and 3 universities had dedicated chairs in her name. Her book, Flying Through the Storms, became a bestseller, with all proceeds going toward aviation scholarships for underrepresented youth. The Secretary of Defense, in a moving speech, declared, "General Johnson saved not only 312 lives that day. She redefined how we evaluate competence versus appearance." Her actions were not only extraordinary, they were heroic. Meanwhile, James Green, now a captain, continued his career as a commercial pilot, often crediting Sarah as his greatest inspiration. The storm had changed him forever, and he now saw the world, and his profession, in a whole new light. For Richard Harding, the reality of his prejudice hit hard. His investment firm had lost 80% of its clients in the aftermath of his viral comments about Sarah. His business went under, forcing him to file for bankruptcy. His marriage ended in divorce, and his life as he knew it fell apart. One day, months later, Richard ran into Sarah at an airport. She was wearing her general's uniform, surrounded by aides and security. He was in his blue dealership uniform, holding a small, worn suitcase. "General Johnson," Richard said, nervously approaching her. I wanted to apologize for everything. For what I said on the plane." Sarah studied him for a moment, not with disdain, but with a calm understanding. "Mr. Harding, you gave me the greatest gift that day." He blinked in confusion. "What do you mean?" She smiled slightly. "You reminded me why I do what I do. Every person I save, every pilot I train, every barrier I break. It's all because people like you exist to motivate me to prove them wrong." Richard swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I lost everything because of my prejudices," he admitted quietly. "No, Mr. Harding," she corrected him gently. "You didn't lose anything real. You discovered you never had anything worth holding on to." With that, Sarah turned and walked away, leaving Richard standing there, alone with the painful truth of his own actions. In that moment, he understood the most important lesson of his life. True competence is earned, not inherited. As Sarah walked away, Richard watched her, the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him like a ton of bricks. He had been wrong about her in every way, and now he realized the depth of his ignorance. Sarah's legacy wasn't just about the lives she saved. It was about the way she had turned his arrogance and prejudice into fuel for her own greatness. Her success wasn't just the best form of revenge. It was a testament to what happens when you refuse to be underestimated. Sarah's journey would forever inspire not just the military, but anyone who had ever been judged based on their appearance, their gender, or their background. As she entered a new chapter of her life, Sarah Johnson proved that leadership isn't about appearance, privilege, or expectations. It's about character. And her story, one of overcoming adversity and proving the impossible, would echo in the hearts of many for years to come. In her final interview, Sarah offered one last piece of wisdom. While they spend time underestimating us, we spend that time becoming unforgettable. Richard Harding would never forget her, and neither would the world.